it's the idea of slowing down to speed up. It takes a lot to put it together, and it saves you time long term.
Welcome to Lessons in Leverage, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of success. We'll help you unlock the secrets of leverage so you can amplify your impact in the world. Here is your host, Spencer Lowe.
Welcome back to another episode of Lessons in Leverage. I'm your host, Spencer Lowe, and I'm joined today by someone that I'm really excited to welcome. His name is Steve Anderson, and Steve is an expert in strategic risk and business growth. He draws on decades of experience in the insurance industry, and he wrote a book that I hope you're familiar with because I've read it and I found a lot of value in it, which is called The Bezos Letters, 14 Principles to Grow Your Business Like Amazon. Now, this has become a Wall Street Journal, USA Today, and international bestseller with hundreds of thousands of followers that Steve has amassed because of his expertise. He was someone that was handpicked by LinkedIn as one of the world's most influential thought leaders. And so it's an honor and a privilege to have you with us, Steve. Thank you for taking some time to talk to us.
Oh, Spencer, it's a pleasure. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
So, Steve, tell me, I want to know about the moment where you decided to write the Bezos Letters. What, you're working in insurance. What drove that? Because I think lots of people at some point in their life are like, I should write a book, or like, it'd be interesting to dive into this subject. So tell me, go back to that moment and tell me what led to it, what drove you, and maybe what that experience was like.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So as you mentioned, I've been in the insurance industry my entire career. Early in my career, working in 2 different independent agencies, all kinds of selling and operations, et cetera. And then really the last 25 plus years consulting with insurance agents, independent agents primarily, on technology. So I grew to really like the technology, was part of a lot of the stuff that people take for granted now, but early internet, early social, early websites, and helping that group of business owners understand the technology and, more importantly, how they can leverage it and use it in their organizations. So we all know technology continues to develop rapidly, right? Certainly today, generative AI and all of the things surrounding that is just another example of fast development. Well, probably 5, 6, 7 years ago now, I started asking the question, is the biggest risk insurance agents face actually not taking enough risk? And since I've expanded that to businesses in general, which again, coming from the industry that actually works to reduce risk, mitigate risk, transfer risk to an insurance policy, seems very counterintuitive. How can you think about taking more risk, not less? So that started me on a journey. I like to research, I like to learn, looking at companies that were once very successful and literally are no longer here, and companies that are successful, have continued to be successful, and trying to understand what's the difference. Why did some make it long term and some didn't? That led me to Amazon as one of those examples of a successful company that continues to be successful. That led me to the shareholder letters that Jeff Bezos wrote. And at one point, I literally got all the letters that had been published so far. There were about 20-ish, and read through them sequentially as a narrative. And what I realized is there were threads in those letters that Bezos kept talking about, not only what did Amazon do and touting the company, but also how they did it. And that was the piece that really got my attention. So literally my first iteration was a white paper. Took 1 page for every letter, did what I called an executive summary of the key points in that particular year's letter, and was giving it away as a lead gen, right? Give me your email address. You can download this. There's some great things in here. And fortunately, my wife has been in the book publishing business for a very long time. And so I showed her this. I was actually really intrigued with it. She sent it to the founder of the publishing company she works for, and they both immediately came back and said, this is a book. And so I didn't start out to write a book, but I ended up writing a book. And when they both came back and said, this is a book, I literally went, I don't know how to do that. And so that started another journey of, okay, how do I take these ideas and actually put it together in something that would resonate with people and help them understand the things that Amazon did that they could do in their own organization. And surprisingly, it's been pretty successful.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful concept, and Jeff is obviously one of the leading business minds of our time, and so being able to get little peeks and insights into how and why he has done what he's done, I think is so valuable. Were there any other companies that you started out looking at? You know, obviously Amazon, you kind of narrowed in on. I'm just curious if you read some of the shareholder letters from other founders, and if so, how did Jeff's approach compare to those, and maybe why, Jeff? Was it just because of the success of Amazon, or what did you see in looking at some of these other areas?
So I looked at a few others, and if you've read shareholder letters, again, these are typically public companies. CEO publishes a letter after the annual SEC filings come out, kind of encapsulating all of that financial detail into here's what we've accomplished and here's where we're going. Most of them are boring. Most of them tout the company, which is okay, but that's about it. What really caught my attention with Bezos is he talked about how. It wasn't just what, but how. And the thinking. And there were specific items in different letters that delved in deeper to how they thought at Amazon. What's the culture he was building? What are some of the ideas that are core to Amazon that has allowed them and continues to allow them to invent new things, to grow, to innovate, and continue to be successful? And we've certainly seen that over the years. So I would say the thing that caught me is Bezos' writing style, and that we could talk more about where else that shows up in Amazon, but he's a really good writer. And for him, writing is how he thinks deeply about things. And so the letters gave me, and I think others, more insights into his thought process. And as you mentioned, I mean, he's, I would say, one of the premier business thinkers and practitioners in the last 22, 3, 5 years now.
Yeah, I know that Amazon has some other practices that I've read about around writing, so it doesn't surprise me that Jeff would be a good writer. And I think it's such an overlooked foundational skill of leadership to be able to get your thoughts, your vision into a succinct, clear, powerfully written memo, or whatever format it takes, so that it's clear, so that people can see it, read it, understand it, process it. It's not just for showmanship and for self-aggrandizement. It's really the ability to be simple, clear, effective in that communication. So tell me about what were some of those other things that you saw in Amazon that you think fostered that ability to write such a compelling shareholder letter.
Well, I think it goes back to the idea of, I don't know what I think until I write it. And there is something that happens when you take thoughts and ideas that maybe there are a jumble of things. And when you start to try and write them out, you have to almost naturally distill them, craft them, and it really helps you think. And that's certainly, we talk about leverage. That's certainly one of the things that I've been able to leverage over the years. I've written a lot, but mostly articles. I had regular columns in industry trade publications, and it really did do two things. One, it helped me think through, what do I really think about this particular technology or item or whatever it is? And it helped leverage my growing knowledge and expertise so others could see it. Because when you see something published and written, and then certainly the book is another example of that, it gives you a different level and allows you to leverage differently than just speaking or not writing and publishing at all.
Yeah, I think that's a really good insight. I know that at Amazon, they do these memos for meetings where you show up and you have to have already written out clearly what the idea was so that when people show up to the meeting, they can read it and engage on that subject effectively. And that's something that I've thought a lot about as a differentiator between a lot of companies where people show up, they talk, and not a lot gets communicated. There's not a very clear position and a very clear set of research and thought and logic and reason. And so they're sort of going through that process of getting to clarity on their own with everyone else there present and just sort of, here's how I feel. And so not that clarity until maybe during the meeting. And so I think that's such a powerful concept. And it's clear that it's helped you a lot as a high leverage skill to be able to write both, it sounds like for personal reasons, but also then to communicate more broadly to others. Do you find that you have a tight writing practice? And I'm curious if Jeff speaks about this for himself, is there sort of a tight writing practice before the public writing? You know, a lot of times people that are good at something in public, that's what they've been practicing in private. So tell me about what are those habits that you have and or Jeff has around that private writing?
Well, I'll talk about him first, and as you mentioned, the 6-page memo, what started out being called that, now more often is called the working backward documents. It really started in 2004 when Bezos sent an email to his senior leadership team and banned PowerPoint or Keynote in meetings. So you can no longer come to a meeting with a slide deck and present your idea. You had to write it out. And what he said was, again, what I just said is when you have to write things out, you get more clarity and you find out where there are holes or gaps that then you work to fill in. And one of the things he said when he talked about this practice in the letters is a good memo can take up to 2 weeks, maybe longer to write, because it takes time to gestate, to think through, to anticipate all the questions that might be asked in that meeting. And again, one of the distinguishing things with that process is that memo, when it's ready to be read by whoever's in the meeting, is not sent out beforehand. Because what Bezos said is executives are busy. They say they'll read it and they don't. So they spend the first part of the meeting, and it could be 10 minutes if it's a short, more easy decision, 30 minutes if it's longer, handing out a physical copy of that memo, and everybody sits there and reads it like study hall. And looking at employees at Amazon who have gone through that process and used that process, one of the descriptors is it's magical because literally everybody's on the same page in that meeting. So now you don't have interruptions asking a question when it's going to be in the third slide down. And Bezos also said people hide behind PowerPoint. They don't think through. They haven't thought through deeply. And at Amazon, that's really key. And I think, kind of like you said, Spencer, that ability to think deeply shows up in the shareholder letters and is a core idea at Amazon. And in fact, if you go on their website in their hiring area, they talk about you may be asked to write because writing is a key skill that you will need at Amazon. Now, to me, so as I mentioned, I've written for a long time. I've recognized early on that one of a good marketing avenue for me was to write out my thoughts. And I'm in the technology world, and so I was able to talk about things coming that people in at least my niche weren't even thinking about yet. So I got perceived as the futurist or the one thinking ahead, and people started paying attention to what I had to say. And, you know, that was part of who I was. I loved trying new things. I'm curious, and I use that writing as an outlet for that. And frankly, it helped me think through what do I really think. And certainly AI now is another big area that I'm using that same process to think through my viewpoint and mindset around this new technology that's come upon us.
Yeah, I mean, as technology evolves and accelerates, it can be scary. Humans in general, we fear change. We tend to not want things to change. It's hard to anticipate what that change will mean, how it will impact us, all the unintended consequences. Since you brought it up, I'd love to go there and just talk a little bit about how do you see AI and what do you think it represents in terms of change for us?
I agree with a few people who have said this could be, I think it will be, the most, and I don't like using the word transformational, but I think it might be the right word, technology since the internet. I remember the late 90s. I was talking about the internet early on, and, there were a lot of naysayers. This is stupid. It's a fad. There's nothing going to come of that. People want to talk to people, not go to a website. Well, how'd that work out? I think the other part of that is I am not in the camp that I'm afraid of it. I don't believe silicon can become biologic. We don't understand how the human brain works, much less be able to program a machine to think like it. Is it a tool? Absolutely. I think it's actually a really interesting tool. Could it be used badly? Absolutely, just like any other technology. But I think the technology itself is more neutral than some people are giving it credit for. So I'm very excited about it. I mean, to the point that in May, I did a series of 4 one-hour webinars just on generative AI, specifically for insurance agents. And the reason I did 4 is I couldn't cram everything I wanted them to start thinking about into 1 hour. And so I ended up doing 4, broke it down into 4 sections. And I do think it will help actually people become more human by allowing them to not do what I call soul-sucking tasks, which are repetitive things they're doing right now that take them away from interacting with people and building relationships with clients, not replacing them.
Do you have any concern on this subject of writing? The better that AI gets at doing writing, do you have any concern that people maybe overly rely on it and they miss out on some of the benefits of this process of using writing to clarify their own thoughts, using writing as a tool to build their mental stamina, build their clarity, build their vision? Is there some risk, or do you have any fear? What are your thoughts about maybe the role of AI in writing in particular and how it impacts what we just talked about?
So I use it in my writing. I think it's a great tool for solving the blank page problem, which is pulling up Word or whatever you use to write with and starting with a cursor blinking, going, I don't know what to write. So giving you ideas and brainstorming and maybe down different paths that you wouldn't have thought about. And I actually follow I don't even know what to call it yet, but I use the 20-60-20 rule in terms of Gen AI and writing. 20% I start with. I craft the ideas, I craft perhaps an outline or a general idea of what I want to write about. And that could be prompting, crafting, it could be a number of different things to help the platform, the Gen AI platform, actually understand what I'm looking for. So I'm more likely to get out of it what I expect. 60% of that process takes place. And then the last 20% is where I go through, edit, add the humanity, the stories. If they didn't, what I found is a lot of the writing is bland. It's words that I wouldn't use, and I don't think most people would use. And I think that's where people get in trouble. They maybe craft a prompt and then kind of take it and copy and paste it. I think that's a mistake, and that may be the negative side for people who are more lazy and think it can help them save time, which I still think it does. and they still need their own imprint, their own voice in whatever they end up writing or producing.
You mentioned that it was in service of kind of insurance agents that it brought you to Gen AI. And so even though you've got this passion for technology, for writing, it all comes back to where you started, which is in serving insurance agents. Would it be a proper understanding to say that that's the customer you're obsessed with? And if so, I'd love to hear about that. And I'd then love to dive into kind of what Jeff has to say about being customer obsessed.
So I would say so that's a complicated question. So that has been, the independent insurance agent has been my audience for many years. And I felt like I hit a ceiling in terms of my growth or what I could be doing in that niche. Still very well known and technology guru, right? All that kind of stuff. But what I started thinking about is how can I pivot or expand the audience I have? And again, when we talk about leveraging different things, the book has been a great leverage for me to have access to a broader business marketplace. And so that's what I'm working on now. And frankly, it's a bit schizophrenic. So I've got kind of 1 foot still in where I've been and 1.5 feet maybe in building a new audience that's more general business or more business that actually want to grow and figure out how to do that in the environment we're in today. And I think, again, that's where the 14 principles come through and the 4 cycles that I use to break down those principles: the test, build, accelerate, and scale. So back to your question. Customer obsession. So I started a company, long story, but about 3-4 years ago now, kind of taking the consulting and technology work I've been doing for 25 years, partnered with a number of state insurance associations to broaden access based on the consulting processes, et cetera, that I created over the years. And one of the key ideas in that company is we do what's best for agents. And that is my version of obsess over customers. And that is one of the core principles at Amazon. And I know people ask, well, every business takes care of their customers. They do, or they're out of business. At Amazon, it's a whole different level. And in the very first 1997 letter that Bezos wrote, there were several sections he talked about. One of those sections is this idea of obsessing over customers. And I always thought the word obsess was very interesting because you don't normally hear that. And I think part of it is it has some negative connotations, meaning you're too obsessive, right? You're over the top. But when you're talking about customers, can you really be too obsessive about them? And he talks a lot about inventing on behalf of the customer, solving their problems they don't know they have. And that's all part of obsessing over customers. And that's been a guiding principle throughout Amazon's history from the very, very beginning.
Yeah, I think that's such a powerful concept because when you think about growth, there's really, 2 elements to growth. There's new customer acquisition, and this is a hyper simplification, but there's new customer acquisition, and then there's customer retention and lifetime value. And if you have short customer retention, you're filling a leaky bucket. It almost doesn't matter how much you pour into that bucket in terms of new customer growth because it just keeps draining out the hole. And so that customer obsession simultaneously gives you the path to add a lot more customers, but it also allows you to keep them long-term and really grow with them. And I have found that in most businesses, growth issues are first and foremost tied to customer retention and quality, and second to sales or new customer acquisition. And everyone goes straight to sales and thinks that's the end all be all. But in reality, it usually starts with a base of how good are we at delighting the customer, at anticipating their needs, at providing the value, the business value that makes it a no-brainer to spend money with us. Because if we're exceptional at that, all of a sudden it's very easy to grow, because even a little bit more water in the bucket, the levels go up. Instead of I'm pouring a ton in, it's all draining out. So with that being said,
that kind of goes back to.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that goes back to your comment about lifetime customer value, which is understanding exactly what you said, which is, we need to bring new customers in because there's just a natural attrition. But the more we can keep customers and the longer we can keep them, actually, the more we can spend to bring new customers in, because we understand that their value over the lifetime that they'll be with us, it increases. And think about Amazon and how what customer obsession means to them, and something that you said triggered this thought, which is when they talk about customer obsession, they talk about working backwards from the customer and understanding the customer's wants, needs, and desires so deeply that they can invent on behalf of the customer. So it's not waiting for the customer to say, hey, I want this, or help me fix this. It's actually anticipating what they want and solving it for them before they knew they had a problem. And I just think that's a deeper level than a customer journey or customer service or customer focus. It goes deeper into that retention piece, which is key. And that kind of leads into Amazon's flywheel, which we can or cannot talk about if you want.
I'd love to, yeah.
So again, one of my principles, and these are growth principles, right? So is understand your flywheel. And so the backstory on that at Amazon is Jim Collins, who wrote the book Good to Great, published in the fall of 2001. One of his chapters, at chapter 8, and by the way, if you're listening to this, it's probably likely you have this on your bookshelf somewhere. And go to chapter 8 and reread it. It's called the Flywheel and the Doom Loop. And he explains in that this concept of the flywheel. So, Amazon. In August of 2001, before the book was published, Bezos invited Collins to an off-site senior leadership team meeting. They spent a whole day only talking about Amazon's flywheel. And again, the concept of the flywheel. And you can think about the pictures you've seen, right? Usually a big metal, heavy wheel, and maybe connected, some of the old pictures you see of factories. You had the flywheel driving the shafts that drove all the equipment. Hard to get that flywheel going. And once you get it going, it becomes easier and easier to keep it going. So in Amazon's case, their core, the center of their flywheel was growth. So for Amazon, growth was the thing. That may not be for your business. So that could be different. What are the inputs? Well, the first input is a customer-friendly website. So the easier the website is to use, the more customers will come to it, and the more customers will talk about it. Amazon did very little advertising in those early years because they used word of mouth. The more customers that come in, that's part of pushing that flywheel, the more negotiating power they had with manufacturers to lower prices. One of the 3 customer pillars at Amazon. They added in 2004 marketplace, so allowed third-party sellers to come on and sell on the Amazon website. That brought in more customers, added more selection, and gave them more leverage to lower prices. As that continued to get pushed, that growth flywheel kept growing. And so the question is, in your business, what is your flywheel?
And if you understand that flywheel, then you can really drive the key behaviors and experiences for your customer that become this virtuous cycle of accelerating, gaining momentum and building on each other, as opposed to slowing down grinding to a stop,
Yep.
losing customers, and kind of shrinking as a company.
Yeah, no question.
That's a great insight. Well, how does that feed into the 4 growth cycles that every company is trying to move through?
So the 4 cycles are test, build, accelerate, and scale. And so I believe every company, large or small, is going through these. In fact, they may have departments or regions or areas that are going through these separately. So test is the idea of how do we invent on behalf of our customer? And the first principle, which I think is really important, is called encourage successful failure. Here's what Bezos says about Amazon. One, he says, Amazon is the best place for an employee to fail because they don't punish failure, they encourage failure. 2, he says, if we're going to grow and invent on behalf of the customer, we have to experiment. And by its very nature, experimentation means you're going to fail. So you need to create a culture where failure is encouraged. Now I gotta stop here because people are probably already thinking, well, yeah, but. So Amazon is intolerant of incompetence. So this is not stupid, let's just throw something and see what happens type of failure. This is intentional, strategic, 6-page memo-ish. We do everything we can to prevent failure, understanding that things don't work. And so I believe that employees actually aren't afraid of failure. They are afraid of the consequences of failure, getting demoted, not getting promoted, all of those kinds of things. And at Amazon, again, if you're incompetent, you're gone. And if you're not pushing and looking for improving systems, processes, and products, you're also probably not going to be there that long. So it's that interesting balance between failure and success. And Amazon has failed a lot that have led to further successes.
Yeah, that's an important cycle to understand. And it's interesting how, when you think about all of these principles, they come with certain values that balance and counterbalance them. This idea of, if you really want to get leverage out of failing forward or being able to fail successfully, you have to also have a high standard for competence, and so any of these things, it's like you could take any one principle out of Amazon and just say, oh, we're going to do this now. We're going to do the 6-page memo. But if you do the 6-page memo and you still let people do PowerPoints and you still let people be incompetent and you don't have all the rest of the values, then that may not be as good of a tactic. And so getting that full context is one of the things I like about the book, is that it gives a lot of context over the years of really all of the thinking behind what Jeff was doing, because any good strategy comes with trade-offs. Inherently, strategy, you're allocating scarce resources to achieve a goal. So the scarcity of the resources is what makes strategy valuable. And so any of these strategies, you can't just do them. They're not just like pick and choose tactics. You have to really understand the trade-offs that were made, the thinking, the values, and then look at, does that align to my business? And if not, could I align my business to that? Or what elements of my business are a fit? Or how do I apply the same pattern and maybe do something totally different? Maybe I have a different strategy. Maybe in my company, we only use visuals in meetings. Maybe there's a business where that would be the best thing, but is it cohesive with the rest of the strategy? Does it align to your values? Does it accomplish the right goals? So I think that's another thing I really value about this, is understanding how all these pieces fit together and complement each other.
Yeah, and this is the way I describe it. The principles stand on their own, but they all interact with one another. And that's kind of why the graphic I put together is a cycle. And it's an arrow. They all work together, with the goal of helping the company improve and grow.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so tell me, how do you think about risk now? When you set out on this journey, you were thinking about risk maybe a little bit differently. And you mentioned it at the outset that you thought, maybe insurance agents needed to be more risk tolerant. and maybe they needed to lean into technology more in order to see the results they wanted to see. When you think about risk now, what's different for you, and what does it mean to you? What does that word mean, risk, and how do you think about it?
I would say probably the word I use most often that I think is a corollary to risk is experiment. And so when I'm talking to people about technology, I'm always saying experiment, test it, figure out, is this something that is going to work for you or not? And at the same time, when you're experimenting, take steps to protect the downside. What would be the consequences of a failure in this experiment? And what can you do to protect that or anticipate what might go wrong? And again, I think that's the beauty of the 6-page memo or the working backwards document. And in fact, when I started this company, I pitched the idea to a group of 15 state association executives to actually invest money to get it going. I used the 6-page memo as part of that process. I would never have done that before. And I will tell you, I spent, I don't know how long, weeks probably, on crafting that document so that it had everything I could think of in it and answers, and even things that I knew were questions that I didn't have an answer for, or a skill that we would need that we didn't currently have. But crafting that document, and the 20 minutes I let them sit and read it were actually pretty excruciating. And then open to discussion, and it was amazing. The depth of discussion, none of the what about, there were questions that we asked, but the discussion was so rich that it really was, it's the idea of speeding up, slowing down. It's the idea of slowing down to speed up. It takes a lot to put it together, and it saves you time long term. And again, Bezos talks about, too often businesses go off on an idea without ever really thinking through, is our customers going to want this? And they get down the line, create the product or the platform or the service, and it doesn't sell because they didn't do the work up front.
Well, I think there's been a ton of high leverage beliefs, skills that you've been able to share with the audience. If they're interested in learning more, they want to figure out how they can, leverage some of these tactics or understand them better. Maybe they want to understand Jeff a little bit better. You mentioned that you might have an offer for the audience. Tell us about that.
I do. And as I said, one of my purposes for this book is to get these ideas out so they help people. And to do that, I would love to give you listening a electronic version of my book, The Bezos Letters. And there'll be a link in the show notes where you can go and download a Kindle version of that book. And again, my ask is read the book and go leave an honest review. I'm not asking for a 5-star. I want an honest review of what you think of the book and examples of how it might help you and your thinking as you're growing your company.
Well, it's very generous of you, Steve. We appreciate it. We'll put links to the offer in the show notes. We'll put links to get in touch with Steve. Any final thoughts that you'd leave our audience with today, Steve?
There's so many things we didn't have time to talk about. I will say one thought, again, for those of you that get the book, is the last principle, number 14, is called Believe It's Always Day One. And this is again, a core concept at Amazon. And it started in the first 1997 letter where Bezos said, this is day one for the internet and for Amazon.com if we execute well. Now, why is that important? Because every single letter he wrote after that always ended with some version of, it's still day one. And it's a mindset of thinking of your business as a startup, even if you're 5 or 10 or 15 or 50 years old. And that mindset will come through to your customers and your employees.
I love that. Steve, thanks so much for all the insights. It's been a pleasure, and we'll hopefully talk soon.
Great. Appreciate being here.
Hey, before you go, I have a small request. Our mission is to empower as many people as possible to maximize their potential through the power of leverage. Could you help us in this mission by leaving a review on iTunes, Spotify, or YouTube? And if you know just one person who would benefit from today's episode, would you please share it with them? Your support means the world to us, and we are thrilled to have you in the community. Thank you for being a part of our journey and helping us grow. You can find show notes for today's show and past shows at lessonsinleverage.com, which also has links to connect with me personally and connect with our various podcast channels across your favorite social networks. A big thanks to Solve.cloud, who sponsored this episode. They're a group of expert consultants that help SaaS and financial services companies to implement, optimize, and manage Salesforce.com. They can help you with custom integration solutions and are helping customers to implement some of the most important generative AI technologies. You can find them at solved.cloud. That's SOLVD.cloud is the URL. Thanks again, and we'll talk soon.